Season's greetings, creeps. Hope you had some hairy horror days and are ready for the funk of 2020 to roll off your shoulder as much as I am. It is fitting, nay, suiting, that I end the year with such a magnanimous discussion with someone I hold in very high esteem, although he would probably hate said esteem. My guest today is Phil Hine, author, journalist, I would even say, of many different metaphysical trajectories, from chaos magic to tantra to yogis and yoga to elusive and archaic whimsies illustrated on his brilliant enfolding.org blog. He is a prolific journalist of thought. Hine has a unique perspective more than most in that he doesn't feel he is an authoritative figure on many of the subjects he talks about. I beg to differ in just a small way. He is authoritative to now, to not be pegged and labeled by his past dalliances, but screams growth through his continual need to document and toil with his own stasis as both mage and writer. This means much to me. I told him, not unlike a musician who has put out many records over the years, or any prolific artist for that matter, it was my duty to not hound him with works so far removed from his current, well, currents. I knew he had tired of all the chaos magic gusto sprung upon him from a popular work he released close to 30 years old now. I am talking, of course, of condensed chaos. But let me not dissuade you from thinking this is a chaos-less convo. Hine is stunning in his ability to saunter and weave his own growth with his past works. But as his 2020 collection, Hine's Varieties states, he is a collection of brilliant and nominal experiences within many currents of magic and artistry. Phil Hine is not the chaos magic guy. He is first and foremost a practitioner journalist ready and able to be humbled by his past decrees, and builds a sturdy humanism within the magistrate that is his body of work. A perennial student, humor laden, incorrigibly witty, and personable, Phil Hine is the exact luminary I needed to hear from at this point in my own trajectory. One riddled with a severe self-reflection that is both transcendent and raw, and one that doesn't take himself too damn seriously. We were weavers of thoughts during our conversation, topics woven like threads through a bright discourse. I'm not one to over-edit these pragmagic conversations, as I worry I would devalue the experience that was shared. This is part and parcel. We cover so much, and I'm keeping the spirit of that Congress of discourse alive by allowing these ebbs and flows. We chat about so damn much, from the chaos magic ethos versus the 70s and 80s punk ethos, the psychic soothing of the self from a pragmatic therapeutic standpoint, and adversely, the bullshit of being too pragmatic with the woo, too. We discuss mentors, gurus, and finding the others as friends first, not authorities. The death of the machismo through a fluid concept of sexuality and not their inherent confines. Tantra and its necessity for traditionalism in praxis and his wonderful workings within such a praxis. We discuss the merits and demerits of our international quarantine's effects on the soul, the inherent guilt and subterfuge we ascribe ourselves to do more when we should be easier to ourselves during this unprecedented time. Most importantly, we discuss that Hine, in his varieties, is not Mr. Chaos Magic. He's too much more, too prolific to pin to any certain current, and his gregarious wisdom with many is too refreshing to omit. If you have condensed chaos on your shelf, which I'm sure most of you do, you are doing yourself a disservice not having Hine's Varieties as its companion. But the text works alone. Rarely we get to see the growth and hiccups of luminaries' work so illustrative in their own trajectory. Purchase Hine's Varieties if you know what's good for you. Read enfolding.org, his wonderful blog, and for the love of the goddesses, stop taking shit too damn seriously. Without further ado, slither hither, weirdos and witches. Here is my wonderful chat with Mr. Phil Hine. Mr. Phil Hine, thank you so much for joining me today. It is a great pleasure. I had a parasocial relationship with you for many years through your works, so it's great to finally chat with you. Thank you for showing.
Great pleasure.
It's so good to finally meet you. Your works have been nebulous in my life, especially as a practitioner in many currents and different things, and um, getting your work, Hine's Varieties, this year, which I think came out early, right? Early 2020.
Yeah, or late 2019. I can't
Oh,
quite
okay.
remember.
Yeah. And I've told you in our correspondences like how prescient I felt that work is with me, and kind of my, I don't want to use the term strained, but definitely odd relationship with chaos magic and my own practices through the years. And you definitely hit the nail on the head in a lot of your own kind of, memoir type writings. So I
Hmm.
really appreciated the work.
Great, super. Give it a plug.
I wanted to ask you too. So this has kind of been a big kind of toil and trouble with me through the years, is kind of defining chaos magic. And I was wondering if you now, through your works from the 80s ongoing, and the huge precipice that it kind of stands on with a lot of practitioners throughout the years, you find it to be a bit of a traditional current now.
You have to remember I haven't really engaged with it for a very long
Right.
time.
Hmm.
That's one thing. So I've hardly kept up with current developments. It does seem to me, though, that there's been a certain amount of routinization.
Yes.
People get hung up on things like sigils and servitors, which, as far as I'm concerned, were just, things for people to try out. I never really saw them as if you like, chaos magic practices per se,
Hmm.
because they're not. In fact, I think it's very difficult to put your hand on anything that's become associated with the chaos corpus and go, oh yeah, that was invented by chaos magicians. I mean, they just
Right.
took stuff in from all directions, and said, oh yeah. And it's, for me, chaos magic was more of an ethos, if you like, a permission to experiment, to
Hmm.
think outside the occult box. I think as occultists we have this habit of not taking anything on board unless it's in an occult book.
Right.
And I saw chaos magic as, if you like, as a permission to bring in things from outside, if you like, that occult event horizon. So I was
Yeah.
very interested in drama therapy. So a lot of drama therapy came into my writing. I was interested in improvised performance. That's another strand for me. Group dynamics was a big thing. I was pulling things in from outside that immediate occult sphere and saying, oh, this stuff might be useful or not,
Yeah.
depending.
You've stated in Heinz Varieties that it's the ethos of kind of like the punk rock ethos of like the 70s and 80s was a bit overstated when it came to kind of a chaos magic ethos. Can you explain that more?
Well, I think there's it's tricky because, yeah, okay, chaos magic, or what became chaos magic, emerged roughly around the same time as punk rock. Um, but it also, in some of my lighter moments, I've referred to chaos magic as the bastard child of Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. That whole idea of, oh, the individual is all important and there's no such thing as society. That's one of Thatcher's more famous phrases. And you can see chaos magic kind of fitting into that ethos as well. But
Hmm.
um, I read a lot of academic. I read a lot of academic writing about chaos magic, and they were making a great deal about this whole chaos punk thing, and I just thought it's overstated.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at Ray Sherwin, ex, teacher, I think, Pete Carroll, ex teacher. These are not people you kind of like think about as punks. Yeah, at the same time, I think there was a kind of like a punk ethos in the idea that, just in the same way that punk challenged this idea of the traditional approach to music, and instead just, oh well, let's just pick up a guitar and learn three chords and away we go. And I think there was that kind of like sensibility in a lot of early chaos magic works, that you don't have to, um, do loads of preparation. You don't have to sit and meditate for hours a day, or do yoga, or learn all the attributions of the tree of life before you can, dare to step into a ritual circle. You learn some easy techniques, and then away you go.
Yeah,
And
I've always
what happens
described
to you after that is up to you, kind of.
Yeah, I've always described more of the DIY, ethos of it. But and it kind of ties back into my first question that, like, are we ascribing too much to chaos magic? Like, are we trying to corner it too much?
Um, well, people love to try and do that. I think
Hmm.
people love to define things and tie them down and say, "Oh, this is this and it's not this," and when chaos magic started, there was a lot of let's say people say, "Oh, this is cutting edge stuff." We're really pushing the boundaries here. We're going places where no magus has gone before, kind of thing, in an X-wing fighter on the astral plane rather than your traditional stuff.
Right.
Um, Nowadays, I tend to think of a lot of that as more or less a continuation of what was happening in the wider sphere of Western esotericism anyway. And I think this whole idea that chaos magic is revolutionary is a bit kind of like passe nowadays.
Yeah. No.
At the same time, I think there is as I said, a kind of process of routinization going on. Um, as I understood it, things like sigil magic were just kind of like, you could describe them in 5 minutes, then away you go. And
Hmm.
what seems to have happened from my albeit limited perspective is a lot of people have come along and made things which were originally thought of as being quite simple techniques into more complicated things. They've added layers of occult complications into things that were kind of like supposed to be quite simple.
Right. Seems like, yeah, just a very common thread within the occult community. You started work as an occupational therapist, and there's a pragmatism in a lot of your writings and your own practice, I think. Um, can you explain, like, a little bit more of how, I don't want to say self-help, but there is like a soothing of the, psychology of the self, I think, within a lot of your work. Is that
Well, yeah, because I have a degree in psychology and I
ah
worked in clinical practice in psychology teams. And when I started to write about chaos magic, I'd only been about 5 years away from that. And I think that, yeah, there is a very strong element of stuff I took from occupational therapy. Because the great thing about occupational therapy is it's a multidisciplinary um, profession, if you like. So the way we would approach a particular client is to say, okay, client X is going to respond very well to if you like, a psychotherapeutic approach to their issues. Let's use psychotherapy. Client Y might respond better to behavior therapy, so let's use a behavioral therapy approach in their treatment. So when you train as an occupational therapist, you're taught a variety of, if you like, paradigms, to use a chaos magic phrase,
yeah.
and you're kind of like taught a procedure whereby you take somebody's particular issue, whether it be a psychological issue or a physiological issue, and you apply what you believe is the best approach. And I think that really coloured my approach to chaos magic.
Oh, yeah, I love that. It's like prescriptive for, different, I mean, obviously for different, ailments of the self. Your work with SWOT, the strengths, weaknesses, objectives, and, threats, I thought was it should be kind of studied in, secular recovery for even
Well, it's something that came out of business practice. One of my mates, who was doing I think he was doing an MBA, put me onto it, and he said basically, oh, this is an interesting thing we could use to apply to sorcery workings
hmm.
or to any kind of results-based magic. Let's look at the strengths of the particular approach we're proposing to take, what the weaknesses are, any opportunistic things that could arise, and then any threats. I forget where SWAT originally came from, but I heard about it from this mate of mine who was doing an MBA, and we were doing a lot of sorcery together.
I love that.
So
You've
that
also
made sense.
Yeah, you've also studied a lot in group dynamics too. So it kind of sings to me as somebody that has how do I put this? Like, struggled myself in the past with, recovery and, mental health ailments and all of that, that it would be a fantastic, you know, um practice
Hmm.
to, place in people within those, as you said, paradigms.
Well, again, that came out of my occupational therapy training because I was
Right.
trained to run groups, and I'd already been in magical groups by then. And what I started to find was that most of the people I was working with in magical groups had no idea about any of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to be in this one group, and there would be tensions and issues, and people falling out with each other, left, the usual shit,
Right.
and they'd be going, "Oh, we need to contact the group egregore and find out what's wrong." And I was going like, "Come on, guys, there's 30 of us here. We could just sit around and actually air, get in touch with our tensions, and try and
Yeah.
resolve it actually by having a conversation and not doing some fucking ritual."
Yeah. Bring it down to earth a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, like when I was studying your book for this interview, I even messaged you, like I was laughing a lot from the humor, especially when it came to like kind of the group dynamic stuff, because
Mm.
Lord, oh Lord, has there been trials and tribulations when it comes to magical groups in my
Yeah, sure.
life.
Yeah. I think that's everybody's experiences. I think you can do some great things in magical groups, and at the same time, they can really fuck you up. And it's kind of like the one feeds into the other.
Yeah, and it's hard too. Like, I wanted to ask you if you found a kind of dynamic where there isn't it's a mentorless or a leadership kind of more in Congress with all the
Mm.
members rather than one.
Yeah, it's tricky, really, because I think that is possible, but it takes a great deal of interpersonal work from everybody concerned. And
Mhm.
I've been in groups that have bent over backwards, particularly large groups, 50, 60 people, where they say, "Oh, yeah, we don't have any leaders." And what I find tends to happen in that situation is the people with the loudest voices get to be leaders. But because they're not formally acknowledged as leaders, it's almost like they're not accountable.
Right, yeah, it's like
So, in any kind of group dynamic, you'll get people who talk more than others, people who are looked up to more than others because of their experience or whatever
Mhm.
dynamic. And if those facets are not acknowledged, then by insisting, "Oh, we don't have any leaders," you can always put yourself into a worse situation when you do have formal leaders. Because at least if you do have formal leaders, you can turn around to that person and say, "I don't like what you did."
Right. Do you find there's like a natural hierarchical kind of progress within groups, like it always kind of stems into that?
Well, groups go through cycles, which of course, social psychologists have identified things like forming, norming, storming, and performing.
Right.
I've seen that in magical groups. I've seen that in work groups when I worked in corporate publishing. But because people have this really weird idea that magicians are born and not made, and that you can be great as an individual magician, and that means you'll be great in a group. I actually find no, groups take
Right.
work. You know,
Yeah. Yeah, there was, the reason why I asked is that, I've kind of been a part of one for a while that we found, less in person, more of a kind of, international, just, publish your art and writing and we'll talk on weekends kind of thing,
hmm
within it. Cause yeah, it always seemed to stem down to someone's calling the shots or
mm,
someone has to call the shots.
yeah.
I always find there's
Oh,
a
you can
dynamic.
if you formalize that role, you can rotate it.
Right. Yeah.
I would help facilitate a group many years ago where we did have a formal leader role, but we rotated it on a kind of like 2 monthly basis. Everybody got a turn at being the big cheese. I think
Yeah.
we actually probably did have a cheese that signified the Magus role.
Yeah. Did you find that? I mean, did that work for a while? Does that?
Yeah, it seemed to go very well. We gave people the leadership role on the basis that they could do stuff.
Right.
So we had one guy who had no formal magic background at all, but he had a van, so he could drive us around, which was cool. And he could light fires in the pouring rain, which I certainly couldn't do.
Yeah.
So
Everyone's got
and
their, yeah.
the whole point of being in a group is to develop each other's skill bases. And actually running a group is a skill, and it takes time and it takes work.
Yeah, and especially like as a musician in smaller confines of that, I always
Mhm.
find that there's someone that's just more enthusiastic than the rest, you
Mhm.
know, and that's always been a hard thing in group dynamics to kind of share that passion with others. But
Mm.
yeah,
But when that passion takes off in a group, I mean, that's one of the things I really love about working in groups, because you kind of like everybody shares it and people get ignited and really enthusiastic. And something I really value about groups is when people get together and start throwing ideas around.
right.
In one group I was in, I actually started to enjoy that process of, let's get together and talk about this and talk about that and have a big argument and fall out and all that, more than the actual ritual work.
Right. Yeah,
Of
absolutely.
that part of it that seemed to be actually more interesting than just, let's go in a circle and do the ritual.
Yeah, and I've noticed that too in your work. There's a lot of you know, like I mentioned earlier, there's a pragmatism with it where it's like you've said, I think a quote was, don't find mentors, make friends. Or don't find teachers in the sense of a mentor, but make friends. And that always
Yeah.
really sang to me. And you've had to find that out the hard way, I'm guessing.
Um. Well, it's kind of weird because I started off in traditional Wicca. We had high priest and a high priestess, and they were a bit distant and removed.
Mm-hmm.
And once I kind of moved out of that very kind of like structured space, I realized actually I really enjoyed talking to other people about the occult. This group, this coven I was in, by the way, they had this kind of like total secrecy thing. You
Mm.
weren't supposed to talk about the occult to other people. If other people started talking to you about the occult, you were supposed to go, "Oh, I'm not interested in that," and run away. It was all very secret, secret, secret. And once I got away from that, I realized I actually enjoyed talking to people, boring their pants off, going on about this or that
Right.
experience. And I think then that's where I learned the value of okay, let's not take all this stuff too seriously.
Yeah. The humor is a
If you can
huge factor.
communicate with humor and you know not taking stuff too seriously, I think that's a great way of getting things across.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
nobody, those people who come up to you, I'm into your cold, and you think, fuck it up, and run away really fast because
You
they're just boring twats.
yeah,
You
absolutely.
don't
You
want to be bored by this stuff. You
no.
want to be excited by it and turned on by it.
Yeah, emboldened and passionate. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's you had mentioned that we're talking about humor and like humor sorely lacking in a lot of these currents, but I also turned that into you were discussing creativity itself,
Mm,
as a huge probably the most, you know, uh higher echelon of magical, development is creativity. And I find a lot in these boring twats, is that they're not creative.
mm,
There's a lack of creativity and imagination because they're too into the traditional currents, or you know
yeah.
what I mean. They're yeah.
I think magic is, if there's one way of characterizing a lot of the magic that was done in the 80s, it was heteropraxy. And I
Right.
think we've turned into a kind of like we're having an orthopractic turn at the moment. People have gone back to saying, oh, we have to do it the traditional way, like it said in the grimoire of blah, so and so person. And if you don't follow the traditional rules, then it won't work. Oh dear.
Right.
And I was kind of like, I'm not sure I believe that.
Yeah. And you've also too, your credit have found the separation of which currents deserve kind of a mentorship or more of a traditional, approach. And I've always appreciated that with you. Like your work with Tantra. Can you talk about how you got into that and what your mentorship with that was like?
Okay, Tantra. I got interested in Tantra in about, when was it? I think it was 1982. I'd been on a kibbutz in Israel,
Mm.
and I came back to England, and I was living in the middle of nowhere, and I just thought, no occult bollocks, I'm going to have a rest from it all. Just going to do meditation and walk the dog.
Yeah.
None of this craziness. I've had enough of it. And I started having this recurring dream about Carly. Now, I kind of knew who Carly was because I'd read some Kenneth Grant books in my earlier years, but I had no real interest in, Indian stuff of any description. But I started having this recurring dream, and I thought, oh, okay, this is really strange. I was completely alone. I didn't have anybody I could talk to about it. So I just went with that and sort of wrote it down, wrote some really awful poetry, kept having the dream. Okay, this is maybe significant. And then a few years later, and I started running around and looking at books on Tantra, and a lot of them were kind of like, oh, sacred sex. And I just thought, where's the ritual? Where's the magic? I don't, okay, yeah, sex is great, but I'm not interested in that stuff, as in, of course I'm interested in sex, but I'm not interested in the sexual side, all the rub and tug sort of Tantra, as we call it. I wanted the magic. So fast forward about 5 years, I ended up moving to Leeds, which was kind of Chaos Magic Central. This was about 1986. Leeds University had an occult society, and they used to invite various people to come along and do talks. And this guy rocked up, and he was doing a talk on, if you like, Western ritual Tantra. He was part of this group called Amukos. I don't know if you've come across Amukos.
No, not yet.
No, okay. Amukos means the arcane and mystical order of the Knights of Shambhala.
Okay.
It was started by this guy who went over to India in the late 40s and became a kind of white sadhu, bit of a hippie type. And this guy whose lecture I went along to was talking about Amukos and their whole approach to it. Was kind of like East-West fusion stuff. And he made this comment which I thought was really funny. He's saying, we in Tantra you have this idea of corpse sadhana, corpse sitting. But he said it's really hard to do that in Britain. What I suggest you all do is go to somewhere like the M62. The M62 is this huge motorway in northern England, which is really famous for accidents. He said, wait till there's a multiple car pile up and then run in and sit on the nearest corpse. And of course, he was joking, I think. Right. And I just thought, wow, I want to talk to you. So after the thing had finished, we were in the bar and I went up and said, I'm really interested in Tantra. I want to talk to you. And we did. We did the whole kind of like year and a day thing of me going around to his house and having cups of tea. I kind of stalked this guy, I'm a bit ashamed to admit it now. He used to live on this little row of houses on the outskirts of Leeds, and there was a kind of like a green area, with trees and a little hill. And I used to hang around in the trees and wait for him. I'd see him coming down the road, dibbly, and then I'd wait for him to go in his house, and then I'd run in and knock on the door and say, "Oh, I was just passing."
Right. Oh, fancy meeting you here. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, no, I haven't been waiting for you 2 hours behind a tree.
Right.
And Andrew, that's the guy's name, he was really, really great. And we used to go on like a lot of walks around the green spaces in Leeds, and we did a lot of magical stuff. And after about a year and a day of him getting to know me and me getting to know him, he gave me a Tantra initiation and started me off doing the Amukos training program.
Very cool.
That was 1987, something like that. And ever since, so Tantra was, for a very long time, it was just one of the many strands that I was weaving, if you like, on my magical crocheting.
Right.
And then by about the mid-90s, I was thinking, I'm bored with chaos magic. I want to concentrate on Tantra practice. And that's pretty much what I've done ever since.
And so you've had if it's almost even to the romance of a mentorship.
Well, it's if you're doing a practice which is really unfamiliar, which a lot of tantric magic is, the texts are difficult for a start.
Right.
Even if you've got a good translation of the text, if you don't have a cultural context to which to kind of decipher what they're talking about, they're almost impenetrable. So it really helps to have somebody who's familiar with that stuff and has done the same kind of like magical techniques that you're doing, and then you can sit down and talk to them about it.
Yeah, and
So
this,
I do things like, ring him up at 2 o'clock in the morning. Say, oh, I'm sorry to book you, but I'm just having a really bad time, and can you talk to me about it? And he'd go, no, fuck off.
yeah.
Ring me in the morning, you bastard. And
Like a sponsorship.
I think that's a thing that people often forget about, having a magical teacher or a mentor or a guru or whatever you want to call it. Is it's really good for some kinds of practice just to have somebody you can talk to.
Yeah.
You can tell all your mad thoughts to, who won't necessarily think you're mad.
Right.
Or who'll
Yeah.
say, just breathe deeply, Phil, it'll go away, Or
Yeah.
this is normal.
Yeah, it's someone too. I mean, maybe this is a generational thing too, just with the advent of the internet and stuff. I almost find that those relationships are harder to come by because they're so abundant in a way.
It can be difficult because a lot of self-professed teachers nowadays are doing stuff on the net, and
Right.
whilst you can have Zoom seminars with Sri Baba Ebop or something, but he's got 200. He's probably got 200,000 worldwide followers, so he's only going to do a general broadcast. But having that one-to-one relationship is, I think, really important, and it is actually, really difficult sometimes.
And yours, like it came in a kind of a natural, perspective of a mentorship. Have you done any kind of magical workings to gain a mentorship or to find the others or
Um, Many years ago, yeah, I did. I think one of the first Cthulhu workings I did was Cthulhu is kind of sitting in the middle of the ocean, sending out
right
his telepathic message to
sleeping?
dreams, sort of thing.
Yeah.
I was doing my first degree, and I wanted to find other magician types, and I did a Cthulhu working to kind of like send out a telepathic woo message to make other occultists pop up in my field of influence, as it were.
Right.
Which
And
I
it
suppose
worked.
kind of, yeah, it kind of worked. I met some people. I met this woman who was, I think she was the first actual practicing magician I met. She was doing a dissertation, a PhD dissertation on UFOs, but she was actually a member of a ceremonial magic order. And she kind of like introduced me to the work of Kenneth Grant,
Hmm.
and gave me lots of really good advice. So yeah, I did meet people. I
You know,
think
I'd be
that's the only one that springs to mind, though.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's definitely something that I've been looking into. Just with the abundance of all of this, the podcast for me is in a way having the vehicle, to
Mm.
meet people that inspire and glean a little from. So yeah, it's in a way this is the magical working of finding the others.
Mm.
But I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you a little bit about the Pseudonomicon, which
Oh yeah,
uh
that is my favorite book, actually.
yeah, I've read that you
Almost
said that.
everything.
Yeah, but I was talking to my good friend Sam Shadow, who she loves your work within the Pseudonomicon, and we were just kind of talking about like where the inspiration came to kind of court this endless, nameless,
Yeah.
Cthulhu mythos, and to kind of conjure it into your life. Like where
Yeah.
did that come from?
Um, well, I started out reading Clark Ashton Smith,
Uh huh.
and I kept seeing these endorsements on the back of these books saying, "Oh, this is bloody brilliant, H.P. Lovecraft." I thought, "Who's this Lovecraft guy?" I kind of read him, I suppose. And I read it, and I guess I was fortunate. I'd moved away from home. I was at college. I was living on the edge of a village next to some huge hill ranges in the north of England. Lovecraft's ideas of the landscape as something alive and animistic and kind of terrible really put the hook in me, because I was
Yeah,
actually
terrifying.
living very close to that landscape, and it just seemed the obvious thing to do was to start doing magical workings with Lovecraft. At this stage, I'd never even I hadn't even encountered things like Libanol.
Right.
This was 1980. So, chaos magic wasn't even around at that point when I was doing my first Lovecraftian things.
Right.
Um, it just seemed the obvious thing to do. you know, later on when it got more popular, you get people going up to, oh, but Cthulhu is fiction. You can't invoke fictional deities. And we go, well, we are, so who cares, you know?
Yeah.
And when I moved to Leeds, I joined the Esoteric Order of Dagon.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you're familiar with them. They're a kind of odd sect of thelemic tentacle fanciers.
Tentacle fanciers, I love it.
Most of whom were kind of the sort of occultists who want to write really tedious essays about the significance of Jungian archetypes in
Right, highfalutin.
Yeah, and I was kind of like more that, well, no, I want to take my trousers off and do something weird in the woods with Cthulhu type occultist.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did a lot of stuff, just wallocking around really, and that's where I'd actually edited an anthology of Esoteric Order of Dagon writings about Lovecraft back in about 87, something like that. And I thought, do I want to reprint that? And I just thought, no, it's really boring stuff. So I decided to do this little thing called the Pseudonomicon. And I was frankly surprised when, you know, people were kind of like, oh, I want a copy of that. Because I didn't think it was, you know, I didn't think it was that popular. And then when I came to the States in 95, I found, oh yeah, I really like that stuff, you know. Okay, there's obviously a market here, you know.
Right.
But I was kind of, you know, there's people have done things like they've stuck the great old ones on the Tree of Life.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really, really tedious. You know, for me, the whole point of the Lovecraftian entities is this primal thing. They're undimensioned. You can't fit them into any kind of, you know, ordered kind of like system. I know August Derleth did do that. He said, oh, you know, this is a water entity, this is a fire entity. I said, yeah, bollocks to that. You know, this again is another opportunity to think creatively about your magical process.
Right.
You know?
I love that idea too, like people trying to cross platform so much, or you know what we were talking about in the beginning is trying to define it so much, but you know you kind of breathe life into the mythos as it were, without ascribing too much other occultnic stuff to it. Yeah.
Well, everybody can do that. It's really boring, I think.
Right. Yeah, that's what you said. It was tedious.
I met a lot of people who want to join all the dots between everything, you know.
Right.
I met this guy once who goes, oh yes, the 72,000 nadis. These are the kind of, you know, streams in some tantric and Hindu body systems. I want to count them all. And I was going, you know, it's a metaphorical number. There's not actually 72,000 because the texts say there's 72,000, but there's actually 3 that matter or 5 that matter. You know,
right.
72,000 is one of those big numbers that people throw about. And he was like, no, I want to, and he wanted to like create this super huge map that mapped and joined the dots between everything. And I was kind of like, you're crazy, you know.
Right.
I'm out of here, you know.
So what is it about touching the void? Because, you know, that mythos is terrifying. There's, you know, I've called it like an endless, nameless, you know, idea.
Terrifying. I don't think it has to be, you know.
Well, I mean, is there, like, I find there's a lot of beauty in that there's, you know, something saying to you that you wanted to, you know, work with it. And was your like first knee jerk that I think you mentioned that you were, you know, it was terrifying, but something kind of propelled you to investigate and to, you know, to really like conjure it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I did this ritual to Yog-Sothoth and on a hill, you know,
right.
at midnight. I managed to scare myself stupid. I actually ran off the hill, you know, ended up at a mate's house at 2 o'clock in the morning, gibbering, and he was like, I told you this would happen. But, you know, I think that's just part of the course. You know, it's almost like a phase you have to go through because you think, okay, all this magic stuff, it's really dangerous and dodgy. And, you know, I'd do the banishing ritual wrong, or someone will come out the skirting board and stitch you right up.
Right.
I used to, you know, do that thing of doing the banishing ritual on the astral plane, as in bed. And one night I fell asleep before I finished it, and I was kind of, oh God, what's going to happen?
You're stuck there. Yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's, you know, it's part of the glamour of magic that, oh, it's really dangerous and dodgy, and if you don't do your spell right, then, you know, the demons will come out and rip you limb from limb. And I think that hardly ever actually happens. But people invest a lot of credence in that, you know.
Well, and like, yeah, it kind of ties into a question I had about your experience with Kundalini. The way you kind of describe that process, it made me think that if someone was not prepared for such a process, that it could kind of be detrimental to mental health. You know?
Okay, well, you do get that in a lot of 19th century, early 20th century writings about Kundalini, particularly
Right.
from the theosophical people. Or, you know, if you have a downward Kundalini experience, you'll turn into a sex mad lunatic and you'll try and shag everything in sight. I had a
Whoops. Yeah.
downward Kundalini experience. Um, didn't find that really. I mean, not more
Right.
than usual anyway. And there's this whole thing that I think the Groffs came up with in the 70s, this whole thing of a spiritual emergency that I think that got looped into Kundalini. And it's just become one of those bugbear experiences. You know, it's like on everybody's bucket list. Oh, I want to have a Kundalini experience, you know.
Yeah.
And yeah, at the time it was really scary because I didn't have a context for it. You know, I didn't know what was happening. I was having these really intense physical experiences, and I didn't have a hook to hang things on.
Right. No anchor. Yeah.
Yeah, I had no cultural context for it. What I did think prior to that was, oh, these things only happen to people who are like advanced adepts, and whatever I am, I'm not an advanced adept. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, the really useful thing about that experience for me was it left me questioning a lot of the stuff I'd observed. You know, you read occult books and you're like a big Hoover and you just suck a lot of stuff in and it goes
Right.
into you. Don't ever question it. And I think that so-called Kundalini experience, because now I can sit back and go, well, was it a proper Kundalini experience? I don't know. You know, it did something for me. Was it
Right.
authentic? Who knows?
It's inconsequential if it's
You know,
authentic or not. Yeah.
it kind of like shifted my perspective, and because I hadn't really questioned a lot of stuff by
Yeah.
that point, it started me on that trajectory of going, well, hang on, let's poke this idea and see if it, you know, what's underneath it.
Yeah, I had a Kundalini experience meditating in the shower in 2017, and I'll never
Yeah.
forget it. It's but like you said, I'm not spiritually like above anyone else. It was just like through a meditation ritual that I would do, and
Mm,
then it hit, and it was absurdly orgasmic.
yeah.
you know and but yeah, it's like if I think you're very correct in saying that, like, it doesn't take a spiritual adept to
Mm.
hit these strides. And
Yeah,
I think
and there's a guy called Agenanda Bharati, wrote a really interesting book called no, I forget the name of it, but he talks about this thing he calls the zero experience,
hmm
which is a kind of like free floating. It's kind of like Freud's idea of the oceanic state, and it's this kind of like mystical experience, I guess you can call it that,
right.
that can hit you at any time. But he made a really interesting comment. He said, well, if you're an art, you can be an arsehole before that, and you can be an arsehole after it. It doesn't actually alter you. It doesn't
Right.
actually make you a spiritually evolved persona. That's up to you to do. The experience itself,
Yeah, it's what you do with it. Yeah.
you need to do things with it.
Yeah, I guess and it set me on. 2017 was a big year for me too, with magical workings and blah 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 blah.
Mm,
And it really just kept me on a path of wanting to investigate it more. Whether it changed my attitude or my assholedom with other people, remains to be seen. But you know we'll see.
cool.
Yeah. I was when you were talking about the um there's things like latent in your DNA RNA structure, whether it's like mental health afflictions or whatever, and Kundalini can kind of trigger that. That made me kind of stop and think.
Yeah, that was me. I think being extremely speculative based on
Okay.
having done an elective year of neurology
I see. Yeah.
back in the mid 80s. Um, so I wouldn't take that too seriously.
Okay.
You know,
I don't,
and
and
again, this is what occultists do. We read
right.
up on something for like 5 minutes or half a year or 20
hmm
years, and I think, oh yeah, this makes sense.
Like it's testament. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, yeah, and like that's, yeah. I wanted to bring it up because it made me it set me on a path thinking. I didn't take it as testament, and I think that's what I love so
Well,
much
that's
about your
good.
writing. Yeah.
I mean, the thing is, I think, is we tend to see consciousness as a kind of like steady state thing.
Mm-hmm.
It
Linear.
isn't.
Right.
It's non-linear. We drop in and out of intense states all the time. And a lot of the tantric practice I do is kind of like making up, creating opportunistic spaces for momentary intensifications of consciousness.
Right.
Hey, I'm just write that down. That sounded pretty
That was
good.
pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah. So I can be walking along the street and I'll see the reflection of sunlight in a pool and just stand there and be with that. And my consciousness opens up and my chakras all go bling.
Right.
Not that I believe that stuff, but it's it can happen anywhere, anytime to anybody. I think it's a great thing. You can be completely rational and suddenly be thrown into a state that kind of like forces you to challenge, that rationality.
I've always thought of being a practitioner is kind of learning to conduct those experiences, right? Like learning to conduct those like singularity experiences with consciousness. Does that make sense?
Well, I don't know that I agree. I think it's affording yourself the opportunity to experience them that isn't necessarily the same as conducting them.
Right. So like not having kind of a control over them. I think just opening the pathways then.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I agree with that.
So conducting the forks, But I was one of the big things to me in the book was this idea that I had reading it, and once again I'm not going to ascribe my own meaning to what you read or what you wrote, but something told me, like when you talked about the queering of Baphomet and all of these other experiences with sexuality, there was you talked about like the meeting with the goddess. It's like this death of kind of a masculinity and machismo, I guess, with Hecate and Kali and Morgan and stuff. And I was hoping you could expand on that a little bit, and like, because I see that kind of happening in society at large, but then again, I could be ascribing a lot of shit.
Yeah, I did a lot of work with goddesses. I don't know. I just like goddesses.
Right. Yeah.
I think at some stage I had this idea that I was kind of like progressing from one to the other. So I think I did about 2 years of working with Isis. Then I moved to, what was the progression? Isis, Eris, Hecate, Babylon. I did this whole cycle of goddess workings. And I think that was good for me. I think it made me kind of like think about how I was relating to women, particularly in my normal life.
Right.
Suddenly realized how much I've been putting women on a pedestal and objectifying them and not seeing them as real people.
Did that play into a lot of your your experience with sexuality?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Because at least for some of them I was working with female magical partners.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't like over theorizing things. I just think it was a useful 5 or 6 years of rather intense magical work. Yeah, difficult to kind of like talk about it, really.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair, and I find that a lot too about my own experiences with magic. And here we are on somewhat of an occult podcast, probably over theorizing and explaining things to the death. It's like it's my own kind of
A lot of the time I just started down particular tracks because it seemed like a good idea.
Right.
I didn't have a goal in mind. I didn't have this is my will to do this.
It was an attraction.
This looks interesting. We'll go down this way for a bit, and if that ends up 10 years down the road going, oh, I'm still doing that, fine, I've never really
Yeah.
pursued that whole kind of like straight path. I just stray into whatever seems like a good idea at the time.
Yeah, I love that. That's, to me, that seems more indicative of intuition than anything else,
Mhm.
like, I mean, I feel that way too, just even in creative aspects, because I work with a lot of different creative mediums, and I just kind of go where the song takes me, or go
Mhm.
where, the feeling. The more I ascribe, a ritual, and I've been trying to practice a kind of daily magical ritual when it comes to projects and productivity, the more it strays from me, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like, yeah, you have to kind of just, yeah, follow the inkling. And have you, like, you're just an incredibly prolific writer, so have you found like a routine that works for you in that sense, or are you just kind of following the song too?
Um, I write about whatever's interesting me.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether anybody else is interested in it.
Right. Yeah.
You can go on my blog, and I've done this whole series on this particular one court case in India in 1862, which I think is really interesting. But I understand not everybody else wants to read my analysis of this one particular court case. So I've always just kind of like whatever's grabbed my attention at any one point, and that's kind of what I pursued.
Yeah.
Um, So, I don't write stuff because it's popular, because there's an audience for it. I write about it because primarily I'm interested in it and I want to, get my thoughts in order.
Yeah, that's what stings to me most. And I was wondering, with the, like, the creation of Heinz varieties, which I know is a collection, right,
Yeah.
of different works. What prompted you to kind of collect these works and have sort of a, you know, speak more about, your experiences within this?
Um, I just thought the time was right.
Yeah. Right.
40
Yeah.
years is a good kind of like, I've seen people who've been doing magic for 5 years and they've written their biographies. And I was like,
Oh
"Oh,
God, I know.
it
Yeah.
seems a bit presumptuous." And I just thought 40 years is a good point. I also wanted to, because people say, "Oh, Phil Hine, chaos magician," and I go, "Well, actually, that was just like a blip, really. I've done things beforehand and I've done things
Absolutely.
afterwards." So I
Yeah.
wanted to kind of like bring that across in the best way I knew how. To say, actually, I'm not just Mr. Chaos Magic, because I haven't really done any chaos magic since about 1998, I think.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to show that I tried to touch on a breadth of topics. And I thought, that would be interesting in itself, but what would be really good if I tried to contextualize those pieces, say, okay, this is what was going on in my life when I wrote this. This is the result of an unhappy love affair, and it's me trying to write about it in a very kind of like, I don't know, chaos magic-y, hardcore way, and
Right.
perhaps not really succeeding very well. Um, that was, where the kind of like slices of autobiographical reflection came in, and I thought that was an interesting thing to do as well, because then I could talk about, you know, this is what prompted me down this particular path. These horrible experiences with this crazy Wiccan coven is what sent me over to chaos magic. That
Right.
sort of thing.
Yeah, it's like, it's rare that you find a, I wouldn't even call this a bookend, because it's obviously, still in the process of your own, path and
Mm,
workings and stuff, but it's rare that you find, 30, 40 years later, someone write about a current and how it's, transpired since their first
mhm.
works of it, because
Yeah,
obviously condensed chaos is on the bookshelves of many people, and I
yeah.
feel it does them a disservice not to have this with it.
Well, that's very kind of good. I really hope that shows
Yeah.
through my next set of sales figures.
Yeah, right.
Um, but there's a lot of stuff that I wanted to put in that ended up not going in, and there were some really awful articles that I thought would be maybe should go in as well,
Mm-hmm.
to show that actually, when I started writing about this subject, I had no fucking idea what I was on about whatsoever, and this is the crap I came out with. In the end, I decided not to do that. Apart from that, stupid book, that child writing from Eris, which is
Which I wanted to ask. Yeah.
totally wince making, but it was kind
Mhm.
of personally important for me, so that's why it got left in.
Yeah. What can you describe your channeling experience with the stupid book?
Well, yeah, it's very simple. I'd done a lot of Eris workings.
Uh-huh.
I'd done an Eris working with the magical partner, and then about a week later, I'd done a big Eris working with the coven I was in. So I was still Wiccan, pretty
Right.
much. And then I was literally sat on this train station early one morning, or whenever it was, having a beer, and it just popped into my head. So I wrote it down.
See, I
I
love
think
that.
I might
Yeah.
have editorialized it later,
Sure.
slightly,
Yeah.
and there's bits of it where you say, "Oh God, this is really terrible sub Crowley stuff," But as I say, it was personally important for me, and it became a kind of like personal touchstone for at least a year. Um,
Very erudite too.
I was very well. I don't know about that, but because I was very very into Eris. Eris was kind of like my bridge between Wicca and chaos magic.
Right. Yeah. Uh I was gonna say I think there's a lot of prescription when I talk to other people that have channeling, experiences and stuff, there's a lot of pomp and pomposity. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean,
With it. And
if you attract a couple of 100,000 followers and sell them books and
right.
videos and T-shirts for the rest of your life, then I guess you need that pomposity. Me, I couldn't do that.
So it was just in one kind of foul swoop. You
Yeah,
just wrote
basically,
it.
I
Yeah.
just wrote it down. Like bad poetry, it all came spilling out of me.
Right. Yeah. There's, you here I am. I'm wanting to, say, oh yeah, it's kind of like the spare automatic writing stuff. But even that is,
Well,
ascribing.
I did do a lot of automatic writing
Right.
because I was at one point I worked for this bookshop that was owned by a spiritualist company. And a lot of spiritualists were really into automatic writing in the 19th century. So I just played around and I've got a whole grimoire somewhere that's just full of automatic writing and, Burroughsian gut ups and stuff like that. And I think that could be really good for your creative process.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you
Just
I'm sorry. I was just going
go
to
on,
ask
no, go on.
if you because of how fluid you are as a writer, that it's tuned more in that sense, in that medium.
Um, I think my writing style has changed, but I used to write under pseudonyms.
Right.
So I've written a lot of stuff. I've almost like created these fake personas. I started writing stuff under, and that can become very creative because it's a bit like one of those Stanislavski exercises where you
Right.
imagine yourself to be another person. You can like create a biography for that person and attempt to kind of like get into that
Method
person's
acting.
head. And
Yeah.
yeah, method acting, and then you write from that perspective.
Yeah.
Um, I once created this guy who'd been a rationalist till the end of the Second World War when the atomic bomb was dropped, and that caused him to lose his faith in religion. He became a Satanist after that, and he joined some weird kind of like Satanist group in Hampshire in the early 1950s. And I had a whole biography of this guy, and I kind of like really got into it, and I started writing a book on satanic practice. Uh, out of his experiences, if you like. Unfortunately, I had a hard disk crash, so I lost the whole fucking thing. But
Oh, I'm sorry to
you
hear
know,
that.
his idea was that the most satanic thing you could do was to mind your own business.
I love
If
it.
you
I
really
love it.
think other people don't matter, then minding your own business is really satanic. And I just thought, yeah, that would be an interesting thing to play with.
Yeah. I
Instead
do
of
this.
running around the internet upsetting people, just get on with it.
Yeah. Oh boy, the forum world. Yeah. I do that too, under different musical pseudonyms, or for a while, before I quote unquote came out of the broom closet, as they say. I
Mhm.
was writing for Disinfo under a pseudonym, and
Oh, really? Who were you
he
then?
Rebel Roz. Um
Doesn't ring any
yeah,
bells. Sorry.
it was in the later years. I was there to
Yeah.
see Disinfo fall,
Okay.
basically. with Thad McCracken as the editor.
Yeah.
Uh,
Were,
but
were you involved in that thing that Jason Love did?
I know Jason, but no, I don't have any direct like workings with him or anything. Oh, you
Okay.
mean the Book of Lies? Is that what you're talking
Whatever
about?
that thing is he edited.
Yeah, yeah, that was the Book of Lies. Actually, that was a very prominent source for me in my youth. That kind
Mhm.
of really set me on a path because it had Genesis, Peorage, and Austin writings on Austin Osman Spare and Alan Moore and Grant Morrison and Robert Anton Wilson. So it was it was definitely an inspiration for me,
Mhm.
and so it was a self high five when I got to write on the blog for Disinfo
Yeah.
because that was like a full turnaround. What I meant with the pseudonym thing, just to finish that up, was
Hmm.
I was writing under different names with when it came to magical experiences and stuff, kind of hidden in a way, right, under a
Hmm.
different character. And I actually talked to Mitch Horowitz a couple of years ago now, and he was very certain that it's time to come out of the broom closet. Just use your name,
Yeah.
you know. And so that's really helped me too, just with accountability wise. But I still
Hmm.
use pseudonyms and other creative practices
So
and stuff.
somebody once said to me, I've written an article for Chaos International under one of these pseudonyms, and a mate of the editor came up to him and said that, this guy's a much better writer than Phil Hine. You should get more from this guy and less from Phil Hine. He's a much better writer. And the editor of Chaos International said to me, he doesn't know that's you as well. I'll be like, ho, 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 ho.
That's hilarious.
No?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
when it's yeah, you're doing good work. If you can be better than yourself under a pseudonym,
Hmm.
you know. But yeah, we were. I did bring up the queering of Baphomet, and
Hmm.
I have many trans queer friends that are big fans of you,
Oh, that's nice
and
to know.
and your writings on sexuality and especially
Hmm.
within magical currents. And can you describe what that queering of Baphomet was, that possession, for listeners?
Um, I, I I think what you're seeing there is partly my engagement with A, queer theory, and B, continental philosophy, so like Deleuze and Guattari,
Mm-hmm.
big element of it there. But I mean, I've done a lot, like I say in that article, I've done a lot of work with Baphomet. I invoked Baphomet when I was in Wicca. I'd done loads of Chaos Mass Bees when I was in the OT. Um, but the queer, there was this event in Britain that started off, I think, in the late 90s and ran on until the early 2000s, called Queer Pagan Camp, which was like a pagan camp just for queer people. I mean, you self-defined queer, you don't
Right.
care about your actual sexual orientation. If you define as queer, you go to queer pagan camp. And I was sitting around one day and I was approached by two friends. So we want to do a Baphomet ritual. And I was like, okay, I'm up for that. But there was something kind of strange about the dynamics because we had a kind of like we were doing it inside a marquee. So I was on grass. Now, if you've ever done possession on a hard, cold stone floor or in a house, it's a totally different space.
Right.
And as we prepared for the ritual, and I was kind of like getting myself possessed as a kind of almost before the ritual happened, I was kind of like working myself up to an agnosticated state. I thought this is going to be really intense. I can just feel it. This is going to be a good one. And I had this friend there, and I said to her, look, one of the things that happened at Queer Pagan Camp that I thought was really good was they had a really strong emphasis on safekeeping people.
Right.
I'd never really come across this idea before. I'd seen people do rituals. After the ritual, you might get somebody who's a bit out of it, and people run up to them and go, "Are you all right?" Which is, of course, is
Right.
the last thing you need.
It's kind of like a
And,
brown acid tent kind of thing.
yeah, so but Queer Pagan Camp, they developed this whole kind of like, if you like, technology about safekeeping people. And after I was talking with some people about this, I thought, actually, this is a really good idea. This is something I'd like to see done in a lot more you know, non-queer spaces. Because I think the thing is that if you know there's somebody who's going to help you and protect you whilst you're either emotionally or physically or vulnerable, it actually frees you to go into a much deeper possession, you
Right.
know. And there was this friend of mine there who I'd known for quarter of a century, and I was like, you know, I don't know what's going to happen when I get possessed by Baphomet, but will you look after my body? That's one
Right.
thing. You know, make sure it, you know, nothing bad happens to the body whilst I've gone away somewhere. So that was one thing. And the other thing I said, will you bring me out? Because I sometimes have real difficulties coming out of a possession trance. But knowing that I had that person there to like A, guard my body and B, bring me out, made it a really deep experience. And you know, one minute I was in a circle of people who were all kind of like Baphomet, 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 in that classic, you know, chaos must be
Right.
kind of way. And the next minute I was gone somewhere. And what I could get was like fragmentary recollections. So there was one point in the ritual where I felt I was crawling around a forest. And I asked people afterwards, I said, well, you know, where did all those trees come from? Because we were in the middle of this huge marquee. And they said, no, you were actually on the floor crawling around people's legs.
Whoa.
I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, okay. I can see that.
So it
And there
was
was
a
an,
true out of like
yeah,
it was
I
a
was
true.
complete.
Yeah.
I kind of like fragmentary bits where, and there was another bit where I could remember I saw all this light and I was really attracted to all these bright, shiny objects. And again, people saying, yeah, you have this huge altar set up. You moved towards the altar and you started sticking your fingers in the candles. So we kind of like pulled you back from that. We didn't really want you to burn yourself, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a really intense experience. I think it's one of the deepest uh, possessions I've ever had. And, you know, it took a long time with many illustrations of water and people gentle calling my name for me to come out of it. And when I did, I was completely like emotionally exhausted and vulnerable. And everybody else had a really great party. And I spent the rest of the night in somebody's tent being kind of hugged basically and fed hot
Yeah.
chocolate.
You know, it reminds me too. There's a is it a grounding thing afterwards? Because I have a like second generation, third generation hoodoo practitioner friend, and
Mm,
they let me part of this ritual. And um it was one of the most like transitory experiences I've ever had.
mm,
And I got sick for like 9 days
yeah.
after it. And you know, they were saying, oh, it's because you didn't ground properly. Is that something you've
Well, I don't know. I mean, you know, it's like this whole thing about banishing.
right?
You know, you do a ritual and then you banish all the forces afterwards, and then you go off into your normal life. It seems a waste, you know. Um, if
Yeah,
I'm going
just
to
to
do a
be kind of
ritual
clean and
and
rid
get
of
into
it.
a really intense state of consciousness, I don't necessarily think that that should be grounded. You know, let's just see where it takes you.
Right. Hang on to it.
I did a Carly working one year at QPC, and I felt Carly was walking beside me for the rest of the week.
Wow.
You know, like literally two steps in front of me.
Yeah, why would you want to
You know,
banish that?
why would you want to ground from that? You know,
Yeah,
and it
exactly.
goes away eventually. You know,
Right.
um, I've seen people go, oh, you know, it's easy to get into those altered states, then blame all kinds of strange behavior, which is actually your strange behavior on the possession state or whatever. But actually, you know, there might be grounds for grounding in some cases,
Right.
but I think the problem is you know you get in a rut and you say, oh, I have to do this and this and this and this, and then that limits you. And what I've always been interested in whatever magical path I've been careering down is let's just explore stuff. You know, let's not take things as canonical. Let's play
Right.
around with stuff. You know.
I find that a lot of people uh kind of turn to magical practice through lapses of, faith, or they're going through, hard times and whatnot. Do you think that like
Yeah.
kind of ordains their, experience with it in a way?
Um. I it's tricky because I think I look back at my own experience and think the actual things that got me interested in magic were not the things I thought they were. You know, it
Right.
took a lot of self-reflection and self-exploration and a degree of maturity to actually discover that the things that I thought were the things that got me interested in magic weren't actually the important things, you know,
Right.
without really wanting to go into some really personal stuff here.
Sure.
But, um, you know, people come into magic for all kinds of reasons, you know, but I think a very common one is they want to feel a sense of agency that they perhaps lack in other parts of their life, as though they
Yeah.
have some control over what's happening to them.
Do,
Very interesting at the moment because, of course, we have very little control over what is happening to us.
I was gonna say, absolutely, yeah, prescient to these times. Your book came out, in 2020, and
Mm.
have you
I was
noticed?
lucky. I missed lockdown. You know, I managed to get it out and get a book launch in the UK just
No.
before lockdown hit. So I was very fortunate in that sense.
Are you guys still in strict lockdown?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, yeah. We were in something called Tier 3,
Right.
and the government were kind of like, oh no, it's going to all be relaxed for Christmas. It's, you know, everybody's going to have a lovely Christmas, and then they've turned up this new mutant strain of coronavirus.
Oh no.
We find that Christmas has been cancelled.
Yeah.
All international flights out of the UK are basically stopped. They're not even letting freight out at the moment. So we're kind of like, oh shit,
Yeah.
you know. So yeah, we're in heavy lockdown here at the moment.
Yeah. And
And there's
like,
probably going to be food shortages and riots on the streets and zombies and who knows what, you know.
yeah, forgive my phrasing, but America's a shit show right now. So
Yeah.
in kind of the same ways, we're in and out of it, I guess you guys call it tier 3. We're like code orange or whatever. And yeah,
DEFCON
another,
1.
yeah, exactly. Like the doomsday
Yeah.
clock is getting closer.
Mm.
Midnight.
I console myself by watching old Cold War thermonuclear horror movies. You know,
I love it. Like what?
Dreads is a really good one.
Hmm. I'm not
It's
familiar.
a British-made film about, basically, it's all set in Sheffield, which is this big city in the north of England, and it starts off with Russians in Afghanistan and America flexing its muscles, and then basically thermonuclear
Right.
destruction rains down on the city, and then, you know, it goes about 30 years in the future. You know, you know, we don't just get nuclear holocaust, we get, you know, martial law, people being shot for looting, people being moved across into each other's houses, mutations, you know, nuclear winter, collapse of civilization, you know.
Right.
It's great if you want to really depress yourself, you know.
Well, if
Because
you want to feel
you
better
know,
about now.
I was brought up in the Cold War. You
Right.
know, I lived under the you know, this thing they had called the 4-minute warning.
Right. The paranoia. Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, and it was, you know, literally at any moment, you know, the 4-minute warning would go off, and then we've got 4 minutes to do something fun really quickly. You know.
Right. Well, like as you said too about, punk rock during that time was an answer to Thatcher and Reagan.
Mm,
It makes sense. It's a freeing kind of vehicle against, the oppressive paranoia, I'm sure, that was rampant
mm,
during that time.
yeah,
Did-
but again, this, you know, I think chaos magic has got many different elements in it. The way I've started to think about it is it's less of a unified thing. It's not really a tradition in the way that people tend to frame traditions. I mean, no
Right.
tradition is, but that's another matter. But, you know, and it's very much depends on the individual perspective of some guy or woman who's written a book.
Right.
You know, you read Pete Carroll stuff, and it's all very kind of like hum ha hum ha. It's very like Pete. You know, I know Pete Carroll, so I
I'm
read his
sure,
book.
yeah.
You know, I just hear Pete talking. You know, and he's kind of like very, you know, science, and
Right.
you know,
Yes.
almost very reductionist, and I'm kind of like, hey, you know, let's play around and have a bit of fun, you know, and I actually don't care whether it works or not. You know, people say, oh well, I do it because it works. It's well, yeah, but anything can work. You know, anything could be felt to work. You know, this whole thing about pragmatism in magic, I think, is a huge blind, because anything can work. You know,
Right.
or, you
Okay.
know, the big thing about occultists that I find amazing is that we can criticize each other's practices and say, "Oh, that's never going to work. That's a load of bollocks."
Oh God, yeah.
People sticking crystals in their fatty. What's that all about? But it obviously works for those people, or else presumably they wouldn't do it, or at least they wouldn't try and sell it to other people. I must tell you this. I had this anecdote. I went to this meeting. It was this guy who's like a New Age teacher, and he was saying, "Oh, I'm going to tell you, do this experience and allow you to contact your past lives." And I was going, I'm already hugely skeptical about that at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And I go, oh yeah. So he gets us to pair off, and we've got to look into each other's eyes, and one says yin and the other says yang for about 10 minutes, and that's it. And I'm going, and that's going to uncover past lives. Yeah, right. So I then this last hours we just went bing and bong, and afterwards we all had to share our experiences, and there was all these people coming out with these amazing past life experiences, and I of course said, well, no, it didn't do anything for me. And he went, oh, I think you'll find it was working subconsciously. I said, no, I think you'll find it wasn't working at all. But I thought about this afterwards, and I thought, okay, I find that this whole idea that looking into a partner's eyes for 10 minutes and saying yin and yang can recover past life experience, really nonsense, But on the other hand, most of the people there have never had that kind of experience,
Right.
They've never tried anything like that. So who am I to be critical that it's, their exposure to something outside their normal repertoire of behavior has given them some kind of experience? It might not be authentic past life, but really, who am I to be critical? And I think a lot of magic is like that,
So yeah, there's a gatekeeping aspect for sure. I think with a lot of, and like I always ask
just
this of
love
people,
to criticize each other,
right? Yeah, I think that's also
those chaos magic people in America. They're talking bollocks. This is the proper chaos magic.
Oh yeah, it's been a headache for me for sure, for many years. But there's also this artistic element too of the self-critical nature, and the skepticism, and when it comes to like the deep woo, that I think that even in the most pragmatic senses of magic, people feel like, who are we to bemoan experiential elements from other people, so
That's good.
do you think that um are there any sources of this kind of woo, this vein of experience that you are absolutely skeptic of, like just wholeheartedly?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we could, crystals.
Right. We could make a list. Yeah.
If you want to make crystals, reincarnation, energy, will, I could go on all day, but I mean, why bother?
Right.
The astral plane. I've no. The astral plane is a colonial artifact hoisted upon us by 19th century theosophists who wanted to use it to colonize the imagination. Got a whole rant about that.
Oh wow.
But
so they're like planting bombs and generations of thought.
Well, you look at early theosophical writings about the astral plane, and it's like they're actually very like 19th century Royal Geographical Society manuals of darkest Africa. We'll go out and we'll these are the inhabitants of the astral plane. Voodoo practitioners, dark black magic. It's very dramatic stuff, but it somehow becomes factual. So I think in a very early edition of Prime Chaos, I tried to throw out this idea of the astral plane and virtual magic instead. Didn't go down very well, and I think it didn't make it into later editions. But yeah, I'm very skeptical about a lot of magical stuff. But that's me,
Yeah.
I enjoy being skeptical.
I'm very.
I have done, I've done stuff. I've done work with crystals, but only once or twice, and only under duress,
Right. You seem curious, like as am I. I'll always listen to the experiences of people with that sort of that shade of that woo, right?
Yeah.
Who am I to say they're not having that experience?
Yeah, even though I think it's bollocks.
Right. Even though I think it's bollocks. Yeah.
You can have both views, you can say, well, that's not for me, It's kind of interesting because I had this a bit of this kind of like tension with, because I spent about 10 years doing a very kind of like Western oriented tantra. And I do something a bit different nowadays. But I kind of like look back at that first 10 years and goes, well, was that all bollocks? No, it wasn't, because it kept me interested. It kept me
Right.
on the path, if you like. It's not what I would do now, but I'm glad I did it, you know. Now I know that some of those rituals are completely made up and odd from a traditional point of view, but it was fun. I enjoyed it. I'm not going to invalidate and say, oh, that was all wrong, I'm not, that invalidates it. And I think you can do a lot of that with magic. You could look back at your early stuff. I mean, I've got magical diaries from 30 years ago, and I read them nowadays, and I just go, Jesus Christ, what a tit! I was really on my own arse with being pompous and all the rest of it. I had this habit of, instead of writing people's names, I'd write them in some kind of like magical script, and now I have no idea who those people are. So all the way through this one diary, it's about 5 years, I keep referring to this person under this magical script, and no idea who that is.
I love that. Yeah, it's kind of lost forever.
It's gone.
Yeah.
Those diaries will be burnt on the day I die, I think.
Who knows? You may have like a it'll come back to you in some experience.
Yeah, maybe not. Hope not.
Your pseudonomicon, right?
Mm.
Your like personal practice and ethos of a different folklore. How is that not as strong as these traditions?
Tradition is always an interesting phrase, because there's you can be on different sides of it simultaneously. So you can be traditional, and that's good because you're following the approved method of doing something. And you can accuse somebody of being traditional because of the stuff you get. It just has no imagination and creativity. They just blah blah blah, follow the rules. Right. I've been doing the same Ganesha Puja for about 30 years.
Wow.
It's pretty. I mean, we add bits in occasionally, but it's pretty much the same ritual. And it's just because I like it.
Sure.
I like the structure. It's not about, for me, it's not about orthopraxy. There are strong orthopractic elements in Tantra, but for me, it's not about orthopraxy. It's about enjoyment,
How has it felt now that, this kind of extenuation of, your practice with Hine's varieties is now out into the world? Are you finding a lot of people that maybe have taken condensed too seriously and are surprised?
I don't know, because I've not had really that kind of feedback. I mean, there was these two guys who did a podcast a few years ago on condensed chaos, and I listened to it and I just thought, wow, your ideas on what's important in that book are not my ideas. It was really kind of like strange, because I thought, no, you're taking stuff really seriously that I only meant as a joke.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How does that feel?
It feels kind of weird. Yeah. I mean, we were talking about the pseudonomicon earlier. There's this thing in the front, this like disclaimer.
Right.
I forget what it is, but it's really pompous. And that was a joke. And it's amazing how many people have just taken that really seriously. So, oh yes, no, I was joking actually. And I think, because humor is very subjective, it's often difficult for it to come across, for it to cross the, if you like, probably the northern UK to American boundary.
Sure.
I often say things as jokes and people take them really seriously, but then I often like to mess people's heads up anyway.
There you go. Yeah,
that's a big part of chaos. That whole trickster thing, I think, is overdone. But I think there's a big element of in chaos magic, certainly in early chaos magic, of just let's fuck people's heads up a bit, if we can get away with it in a nice way, in a loving way.
Yeah, there were always testaments too from you, as as a practitioner of it. These were always like not so much how-tos, but hey, this is what I did, and this is what affected me.
The weird thing about condensed chaos is I wrote it really quickly. Because I heard from my agent that I'd got a contract with New Falcon as it was then. And this was about, I think, May or something. And he said, oh, they'd like a manuscript by September.
Wow.
And I was kind of like, oh, and how much do they want, in terms of words? And she said, well, about 60,000 words to do it. And I was kind of like, shit. So I basically just wrote it really fast. And fortunately, by that point, I'd had about 10, 15 years of writing other stuff. So I just basically, threw lots of stuff into it. And I was doing I think I was running a course on practical magic in London at the time, and some of that went into it, and loads of things just got shoehorned into it really fast.
Yeah.
So in a way, I'm surprised that it's lasted. It's still, I mean, it still outsells everything else.
Yeah, it's great.
I had some
It's
sales figures in recently, and it's kind of like, oh, that sold a couple of hundred, that sold a couple of hundred, that sold not very much at all. Shit, Condensed Chaos. So I sold about 1,000 copies last year.
oh yeah,
Which
I
I
have
think is not bad for a book that was written in '95.
right. Yeah, I have friends that, that have a passing familiarity with magic, and condensed chaos is on their bookshelves.
Hmm.
Like, what's your relationship with it now, like after all these years?
Um, there was a time when I was actually thinking of not having it really kept in print,
Really?
because I just got so sick of people going, Phil Hine, he's a chaos magician. Because I was thinking, actually, no, there's more to me than that.
Of course.
And I got into this real adversarial relationship with my own chaos magic writing. I just wanted to forget the whole thing. And some very good friends said to me, look, this is a really good book. You should get the publishers to reprint it. It's still got value. Because I was actually getting into this real kind of, as I say, negative relationship
Like a
with my
funk.
early writing, which I think is okay. And now that I'm kind of like not employed by a major corporation anymore, it's actually quite valuable to have it out there making me money. So
Nice.
and I sort of read it every couple of years or so, and just think, oh, okay, yeah, that bit's okay, that bit's a bit dreadful, and that bit's okay, So yeah, I've got back into a sort of more equipoisal relationship with my own early chaos writings.
One of the big things when I was talking to friends about, talking to you, as someone that's put out many musical albums, I don't want to talk about the one from 2004 and not the
Yeah,
ones after.
yeah.
So it was definitely on my mind because, and you've been so upfront and, kind of wonderful about your experience with it. And it's affirming to kind
Yeah.
of see that same artistry and that like self-critical nature and that weird relationship you have things with, that you put out into the world so many years later.
Well, I think it's important to be self-critical,
Yeah.
or to have people around you who are willing to be very critical. I mean, my partner Maria is extremely critical
Oh,
of
I've got one of those.
my writing, which is great, because nobody else will be. People will, oh, that's really nice. And she'll go, no, that's really shit. Nobody wants to hear about that stuff in a lecture. It's boring. That should be in a piece of writing when people can engage with it at their leisure. But nobody wants to hear about that in a lecture.
I have
And
the
she's
same
quite right,
relationship. Yeah.
She's usually quite right. So she gets to read everything I write.
Yeah, my partner is the same. Like if she can't compute it, she'll be the first one to say it. And she's kind of my outlet to writing for the rest of the world.
Yeah. I used to say, and this is pre-internet, obviously, if somebody writes you a shitty letter, you should put them on your Christmas card list about something you've written, because, that means they've taken the trouble to be so incensed by what you've written that they've actually, wrote to your carrier or publisher or your editor a stroppy letter telling you what they think.
Right.
And that kind of critique is rare, because most people just go, oh yeah, it's very nice, or no, this is crap, throw it away. But if somebody's actually moved strongly enough to address you directly, that's a good thing. Of course, you can have too much of that nowadays with email and social media being so, making things so immediate that it's really easy for people to go, it's just rubbish, go away, shut up.
Amazon reviews, yeah, 2 stars.
I never read them. I never read them.
Oh, I'm sure I'm sure you'd be surprised because I'm sure they're phenomenal for your
No,
books.
I'm sure there's some really correct ones, you know.
Yeah, of course, there
Well,
always is.
that's part of the course, you know.
Yeah,
You're involved in the creative industry, whether it be writing or music or whatever. You stick your head up above parapet, people are going to have you go at you. That's just life, you know.
yeah. There's something you said about them being so incensed to take the time and the passion, to
Yeah.
draft something against it. Kind of makes me think about hexing.
Mm.
This idea of hexing in a way where it's like I'm not really worried about the result of someone hexing me. I'm more worried about the psychological implications that they felt moved
Mm.
enough to do it.
That's a really interesting point, because that's always, you know, when people bring up that very tricky subject of
Right. Yes.
cursing, people are, I've been cursed, you know. I said, well, why would somebody bother cursing you? You know,
Right. Yeah.
what is it about you that somebody would go to all that trouble to curse you? You know, because I think 99% of cursing is either it's in your own head.
Yeah.
You know, it can be dismissed once you work through a very simple set of principles like, have you been eating enough? Have you been drinking enough water? Have you been maybe taking too many drugs? You know, once all those things are eliminated, then you can start thinking about cursing. But the other thing, of course, is people like to think they're being cursed. They're important enough, you
Right.
know, for those nasty black magicians down the road to be sticking pins in a doll or whatever. I was at a party many years ago, and there was this guy going on about being cursed by Satanists. And I'm sure these Satanists were in his own head, and he was going on about how he was, you know, having these big astral battles and stuff with them and all that shit. And he turned around to me and he said, and what happened? How do you cope with this, Phil? I said, I just send Tracy round, and there's this huge woman all in black leather with big studded belt and like fingerless studded gloves. I send Tracy round, and she breaks their fingers, and she's like, wow. Big lesbian friend of mine who was really butch, you know, short cropped hair, studs, leather, and he was kind of like, ooh, you know. And I remember many years ago, this guy really fucked me off, and I was going to curse him. And I must have known about a couple of, you know, dozen, you know, fairly effective ways of cursing somebody by that point. You know,
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, the very first magic I ever did was to curse somebody. So, you know, I'm not a tyro when it comes to that sort of thing. No, this guy needed something special. I just didn't want to pull off like do an off the shelf thing. I thought I really need to pull the stops out on this and really, you know, really kick him in the pants, you know. Death's too good for him, kind of thing. Why let him off early with reincarnation to a hell? No. And I spent literally an entire night thinking of really, really evil ways to curse this guy. And then in the morning, I realized I just wasn't angry anymore. I'd kind of like, instead of pushing all those naughty thoughts aside about cursing because it's unethical and all that stuff, which, yeah, of course it is. I allowed myself to get really enraged and be in
yourself.
quite creative ways. That, you know, that story in Hine's Varieties with the guy, and it's got this thing called a Berthiaume trap in it. I think that came out of that evening of just having total evil thoughts about this dude. But I'd actually blown out my anger.
You're right.
And you know, and in the end, I didn't bother cursing him because I just thought, actually, he's not worth my time.
That's fine. Yeah. So like just the meditative effort of, you know, like the intention, you know, and the anger, you just kind of, it allowed itself to just die off.
Yeah.
Instead of, are you happy you didn't act on it?
You know?
Right. Well, I'm sure you are now. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it just wasn't worth the time, you know?
Yeah. And I find that, about most.
It would have been much easier just to ring up an old mate of mine who was an ex you know, army guy and just say, you know,
rough him up.
You know, post a piece of shit through his door, something like that.
Right. Yeah.
You know, which is obviously unethical. I would not ever advocate ever doing anything like that. I mean,
of course.
The thing is, the Wiccans I knocked around with were very into the idea of almost like community cursing. So if somebody does something wrong in the community, then they have this idea of, yeah, you do curse them because we don't want that rapist going around harassing women.
Right.
He
Yeah.
has to be found. He has to be, stopped from raping any more women. So they had this very kind of like, I guess, pragmatic approach to ethical issues like that. And it was kind of like, if you can do something to stop somebody being bad, then you do it, no messing.
How do you feel about like the politicking of a cult and like the covens that were, cursing our president or whatever? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's great, actually.
Right.
Yeah. That whole thing, it works, is been increasingly over the years a difficult area for me, because people make all kinds of claims about, we did this and we did that, I just think that's inviting hubris. But I mean, yes, Trump is out, but I mean, well, he's not actually out yet, of course, because he's still hanging in by his nails. But and people say, oh yeah, we did that, but okay, you helped,
Sure.
It's the best you can say. I'm fully into people doing magic for political purposes. Because I have very strong feelings that is a good thing to do. However, having said that, I really hate magicians talking about politics, because I just think it just sounds, particularly when they go on about all the spiritual reality behind this or that political event, and it just sounds awful to me.
It's the same feelings I have. There's this like Venn diagram of the conspiratorial world and the occult world, right? And in the middle, there's a lot of that, and it's a lot of ascription of, I hate to use the term, but like it's a victimhood of some sort. It's not like a personal responsibility.
There's that thing of, we're the people who know what's going on kind of thing, which I really hate, because often you're the last people who know what's going on. So I don't like magicians talking about politics, because usually they're not that aware of stuff.
Sure.
That's my personal experience, but I think doing magic is a political act.
I love that. Yeah.
There's no way you can escape that.
Especially if we're talking about conducting pathways to open for things to happen.
When I was first getting into magic in the 70s and 80s, there was this huge thing about magicians and witches not being political. I just thought that was rubbish, because if you're serious about your own practice and having a sense of power and agency, then why shouldn't you be using your magic to influence the world?
Yeah.
Whether of course you can or not is another matter, but at least you can make the effort and try. You look at saying that magic is not political, I think is nonsense. You look at most world cultures. I mean, in England in the 17th century, it was illegal to cast the horoscope of the king.
Right.
You could be put in the slammer for casting the horoscope of a member of the royal family, because that implied that you were looking to put your magical dukes on him, as it were. So magic and politics for me have always been two things that are very closely together with each other.
You want community, you want unity. You want people
I don't know about unity, but I mean, I think community is good,
Right. Yeah. Maybe not. Yeah. Discourse is best. But at the same time,
conversation, disagreement, even, disagreement can be really good. And something Rodney Orpheus got me into in the 80s, when I was working a lot with Rodney, was this whole Vulcan thing of infinite diversity, infinite combination. We were like huge Star Trek fans, and we got into this whole idea of, if we're serious about individual freedom, then we have to allow people to have different opinions.
Right. Absolutely.
To an extent,
Right.
and to allow different combinations to come forth out of that, and sometimes that means not trying to paper over the cracks and saying, yeah, there are disagreements in this group, in this magical order, in this tradition. We don't agree with each other. There are tensions. We don't try and resolve them or brush them aside. We acknowledge them. And that was a really good thing about QPC, because queer pagan cat, because
Mhm.
when it came down to it, if you said you were queer, then they accepted you as queer, and it wasn't about your sexual orientation or who your partner or partners were. It was self-definition. So there was a recognition that baked in, if you like, that this was something that transcended path or sexual orientation.
I
And I
love
think that's
that. Yeah.
a really good base to work from. I mean,
Yeah.
it all fell apart eventually, and people had huge rows, and
Oh.
don't talk anymore. But kind of, it was good while it lasted.
Yeah, and it seems like it just keeps churning. The more I want with my, especially, in 2020 during lockdown, I'm finding a lot of parasocial relationships on the internet, and
Hmm.
there's a hard edge when it comes to people understanding humor or disagreements. And the surprising thing that people say with me is that, like, I can put up a fight, but I don't hate you
Hmm.
afterwards. Like, like I want to keep that going, but it's very hard for most people, especially in the cult sphere, to like disagree and be happy about the disagreement.
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, there are still people I won't talk to now after 20 years because of that business with the avocado.
Right.
1992 or something, whatever it was, and I'm still not talking to them. Um, I think because the occult practice touches us very deeply and
Yeah.
very personally, and it's easy to become invested in that. And so it's like when groups fall out.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
I know people who were in groups 30 years ago and they've fallen out. They're still fighting over those same issues. I'm
Yeah.
probably one of them, actually. Um, and that's kind of fine. And I think it's sometimes good to acknowledge that. It'd be nice if we could all move on, but
Right.
sometimes I think it's really difficult. I mean, there's people I know who I fell out with 30 years ago. It's almost kind of like it's not actually, we can't just suddenly snap into a kind of like, oh, we're all fine now with each other, because there's too much unresolved stuff. And
Of
we
course.
probably have to sit down for a couple of weeks and, relive some extremely painful material to get on an even keel again. So at some point, disagreements can turn nasty. And I think that's just something you have to live with,
Yeah, absolutely.
you know.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think social media is good in that sense, because it allows me to contact people who I'm kind of like really wary of having a direct face-to-face encounter with, but I can kind of slowly rework my feelings about them by having a limited contact through social media.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about your relationship with social media, especially after publishing before the advent of, the
Mhm.
internet and all of that, like how that's changed maybe the publishing game or your outreach.
I think it's generally been a good thing. I mean, in the early 90s, my first response to the internet was to get, I started PDFing a lot of my old writings and just letting it go out there. And nowadays, that would be seen as a really incisive marketing move. In fact, I've been reading some guys who, there's these guys who do courses for writers, and they say one of the things they recommend is that, give something away for free.
Right.
And I just
Yeah.
thought, yeah, I've had books that I've given away on the internet for free, and then people have translated them into like Spanish and French and Russian.
Yeah,
You
that's
know,
amazing.
and occasionally I've had people say, "Oh, I've just translated your book Permutations into Italian. Do you mind if I sell it?" Absolutely not. You can give it away free, but
Right.
that book is not for sale. And I've been quite specific about that. And I think the onset of the internet, because I worked in publishing a very long time.
Right.
I worked in book production, 2 book production companies and in a magazine company. And I think the internet has changed the game somewhat. But I've always done my own self promotion. In a way, I'm very fortunate as a writer, because I kind of like became fairly established, even before the internet.
Right.
I do a lot of free writing, if you like. People have said to me, "Oh, you could go behind a Patreon thing," and I just go, "Fuck that, I can't be interested," because I think if I was doing that whole Patreon thing, I'd feel like I had to write stuff that people wanted rather than
Right.
what I.
Yeah. There's an
That's what
expectation
I
there.
enjoy. I don't want to write another, how to contact your chakras, because I just find that really dull, and boring. And whereas I'd be far happier writing about the history of how the idea of chakras arose in Western esotericism over the course of 50 years in the 19th century. That
Yeah.
interests me. Writing a whole thing about how to activate your chakras it would bore me senseless. So I'm not I can't do this thing of let's find out what people want and
Right. And
you get that
teach
all the.
me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the patience for that. I've tried. The only time teaching somebody really worked was for a very brief period of time. And what I would say to people is, look, I'll tell you what I know, what works for me, magical wise, but only on the condition that you'll get better than me at something, and you'll come back and teach me.
I love that. Yeah.
So
Perennial student.
there has to be a reciprocal relationship
Yeah.
here. I'm not just telling you, truths that have come down off the astral plane. I'm just, sharing my ideas and wacky stuff with you. My hope is that you'll get better than me at something and come back and teach me, and that worked a couple of times. And I think with everybody who gets to a certain age, you start thinking yourself, I've got ideas to impart. I've got truths I want to share with the world. I'm going to become a magical teacher, and I think I don't have the patience. I just like talking to people.
Yeah. There seems to be just an onslaught of DIY magic books in the past few years. And it seems to be how do I put it? Not from people that are seasoned, but very fresh
Yeah,
with a lot of things.
in a way, that's publishing.
Right.
Because it's kind of like, well, publishers want to sell books, so they go with what's popular.
Yeah.
So, this is why virtually every occult book written, I think, between 1974 and 1999 has to have a chapter on chakras in it. Because chakras sell. Or crystals, or tarot. Tarot
Right.
is hugely
Tarot's
popular.
huge right now
Tarot
too.
is
Yeah.
amazingly popular. People who work in marketing departments of police will say, yeah, that sells. And nowadays, what happens with a lot of big publishers is that it's not so much that you write a book and then go on to them and say, oh, I've written this book, do you want to publish it? They will actually, shape a catalogue and then go out and look for people to write that stuff. And, there's been cases I know of people who've, say, started writing a book on tarot, very interesting. Editors have had a look at it that, no, this is not what we want. We're going to actually give this project to somebody else.
Right. Yeah.
What's freed us, of course, is print on demand publishing. And publishing book, having just published a book under my own imprint very recently, it is a much easier process than it was 20 years ago. And I was, hugely surprised actually that it was actually a lot easier than I thought it would be.
Are you talking about like the advent of like say Lulu or
yeah, Amazon, Lulu,
yeah.
all the million and other print on demand options. Yeah. I think that's good, and the author has to do a certain amount of legwork. I think that's always been true, particularly in esoteric publishing, which is a niche area at best. But when I say it's a niche area, you have to remember it's a multi-billion-dollar
Right.
niche area. We're talking serious money here. So, and yeah, there's a lot of shit that gets published, but I think that's a good thing.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean,
yeah,
it's just, it helps you weed out
with David Conway's Magic and Occult Primer.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was a great book. It was one of the first practical books I picked up, having read a lot of theosophical wibbly wobbly, which had nothing practical at all in it.
Right.
And a lot of Dennis Wheatley books, and that was the first book that actually, gave me step-by-step instructions. And again, this is something I think people get really snooty about. It's always kind of like, oh, you've done the I don't know, Jenny Greenteeth's Book of Practical Spells. Well,
Right.
no, I read Cornelius Agrippa. Shut up. You
Yeah.
know, you
Yeah.
know, somebody was tweeting this morning about people not being told to read Agrippa as their first book. And I've never read Agrippa. I guess I don't really have that problem because the kind of books I get to read are things like this Siddha Yoga's Varimatta Tantra, which is written in 8th century Kerala or somewhere.
Wow.
So that whole kind of question of which occult book should I start off reading, it's kind of like, well, any occult book.
Yeah.
I think I've mentioned this, might have mentioned this in Hine's Varieties. The only reason I got interested in all this stuff in the first place because I was reading Man, Myth, and Magic and looking for pictures of nude witches in it.
Exact. I wanted to bring that up because I have the full collection of Man, Myth, and Magic.
Yeah,
Like
and there's
the actual prints.
those pictures of Alexander's and
Yeah,
Maxine Sanders in the nip, and
exactly. Yeah.
I was kind of like 16 in the school library reading this,
Looking for nude witches. Yeah.
looking for nude witches, and that's kind of what started me off.
Yeah. I love. Yeah.
And if I can end up where I am, after 40 years of being silly, having started out just on the basis of wanting to look at pictures of nude witches, I really don't think it actually matters what you start out reading.
Yeah. The world's at your
Again,
fingertips for nude witches these days.
Anything can maybe be made to work.
Yeah.
Just keep that mantra in mind. And anything can be made to work if you're up for it.
I love that.
Do
you have your finger on like kind of the pulse of modern occultism? Are there modern writers that you find kind of rise above the rest? Yeah.
I don't read occult books.
Right.
I read occult books. Translations of tantric texts, or I read very hard to get your head around academic commentaries on same, or I read a lot of ethnological material, but I don't read occult books. I actually can't remember what the last occult book I read was.
Wow. Yeah.
I sort of skim read a lot of them for a while because I was working for a big online occult web store, and I was actually writing book reviews. So I was kind of like reading through stuff and going, yeah, okay, and just writing these little potted reviews of these books. But all that stopped with lockdown.
Right.
But that's the only contact I had with the actual occult milieu. I'm kind of like, this is why I say I don't really engage with chaos magic. So I think the last chaos magic book I read one of Gordon White's books.
Okay.
Didn't think it was that interesting, but
the protocols or whatever. Yeah.
It was Pieces of 8.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't read it.
Well, that was it. So no,
Yeah.
I don't read occult books.
Are you like in Congress with any cultists these days, or is it more of just an individual practice and you're just doing your own thing?
I've got friends who are occultists, so I still, we have chats about this and that. I'm still in contact with some of the tantric practitioners I've not been knocking around with for the past 20 odd years.
Right. I know tantra's been such a major, component of your life.
Let me wave something at you, in fact.
Ooh. I think I've seen this on Unfolding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is it's Mike McGee is a guy he's a tantric practitioner who's been translating tantric texts since about the late 80s. Also a very highly regarded IT journalist as well. He started the Register.
Oh, weird! Wow.
Familiar with the Register. But this book is a collection of his translations of material relating to yakshinis. Yakshinis are kind of like Indian forest spirits,
right?
Often related to trees. And what you get in kind of like fairies, yeah, I guess. Fairy folk with teeth because they're kind of jealous. But what Mike has done is he's gone through a lot of tantric material, looking at the methods by which these fierce, often jealous female spirits can be propitiated or approached, or asked for wealth or some other operant desire. and he's kind of summarize these texts. So it's a very specialized work, and a lot of it is in. We've included the original Sanskrit.
Oh wow.
I basically typeset this and design the cover and so forth.
Oh,
And
very
put it
cool.
we
Do you think
we did it.
it's a good introductory text for tantra?
No, not really.
No, it's yeah.
It's not an idiot's guide to something that is by any means. It is fairly specialized. You know,
Sure.
to make use of it, you'd have to have a general familiarity with Indian magic.
Do you have a recommendation for not an idiot's guide, but you know, a good kind of introduction to tantra?
Oh yeah, I would say without much hesitation, probably the best introduction to Tantra written nowadays is Christopher Wallace's Tantra Illuminated.
Okay.
It's now, having said that, it mainly focuses on the non-dual tantric traditions, but you know, getting your head around that stuff would be a big help. So he doesn't look at the post-classical tantric tradition. He doesn't look at the. He leaves a lot of stuff out, but the stuff he does talk about is really good. He's a very good writer for taking very let's say difficult tantric ideas and making them comprehensible to a Western audience.
Okay.
He's kind of a scholar practitioner. So, yeah, Christopher Wallace's book, Tantra Illuminated, check it out. It's a really good introduction to tantric thought. It's not a practice book.
Right.
But before you can practice, you need to get your handle about what those people are saying.
Absolutely.
I think it's a great book for that. I wish you'd written it 20 years ago. It would have saved me a lot of trouble, you know.
So like,
because my tantric mentor did say to me, he said, you realize it's going to take you 10 years to start before you'll get your head around this properly. Well, he was quite right. You know, it had taken me a very long time to even start thinking I was making progress, you know.
After 10 years, yeah.
Yeah, it's nothing, is it really?
Oh, right, yeah. You know, your work with unfolding.
When you get to my age, Maddie.
I know.
I'm 60.
Just half. Just half.
Oh Christ. I feel even older now.
You know, there's so many questions that flood my mind of like, you know, how have you been dealing with quarantine? Like, have you been working on something? Is it coming out? Like,
okay, well, I mean, it's been really weird because it's pretty much my practice at the moment is going for a walk every day.
I love it.
You know, we're very fortunate here in London. There's lots of green spaces within walking distance. So what I found I will do is regardless of the weather, I will go out into a green space and spend at least half an hour, you know, in as secluded place as I can, just doing a meditation.
Yeah, that's great.
And that's, you know, that's the basic of my practice really. And just it's very, I think something I'm saying to my friends continually is, look, this is not a normal situation. You can't judge your behavior and productivity, particularly by normal standards.
Yeah,
you know?
I appreciate hearing that.
Give yourself some slack, you know, because things are not normal. This is affecting us in all kinds of weird ways that we don't always acknowledge. If you have too high a kind of like an expectation of what you should be doing versus what you actually can do, you're going to cause yourself grief. And that's something else that came out of my OT practice, because I did a stint working with people who were basically had terminal illnesses. You know,
it's kind of like palliative.
Sorry,
palliative, like.
Well, we had to give them things to do, occupy them, but and make sure that the things we gave them to do were challenging, but not so challenging that it actually reminded them that their skills were deteriorating.
Right.
You know, so we had to keep people interested, but not make them depressed because they'd realize that they can't do the things they used to be able to do anymore, which, you know, takes a certain amount of fine judgment. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed working with people who died. You know, not a lot of OTs don't, because the whole OT ethos is about getting people better, getting them rehabilitated. But I really enjoyed working with people who are popping their clogs any minute.
I'm sure that's a hard truth.
Yeah. So, what am I working on? Well, we've just brought out Yakshini Magic, so I'm probably going to be tweeting about that. There's this series of booklets I wrote in the mid-80s that's now known as the Shamanic Trilogy. It's all over the web, basically. What I've been thinking is reprinting that, probably as a softback, because I don't think it deserves the limited edition hardback treatment. I just find that so weird. But redoing it with again that kind of contextual approach that I used in Hine's Varieties.
Yeah.
Trying to explain how these various ideas emerged, what I was doing magically at the time. I've also got various bits and pieces that I wrote roughly around the same time, which were going to go in further books that never actually made it out past the door, as it were. So I'm thinking of doing that as a kind of like maybe with a couple of interviews with me talking to other people into the similar kind of practice, the sort of urban shamanic practice thing. Let's not dwell too much on that word shamanism. I know people will get really culturally appropriative.
Yeah, loaded. Yeah.
Nah, it's a loaded term, and we have to recognise that. But nobody was talking about that stuff in 1986. So
of course,
live with it. So I'm thinking of doing that. And that's involved a lot of excavation of really early magical records and trying to find out if the stuff that what I actually thought about it as opposed to what we actually did. So that's one project. I've been doing a series of lectures for Treadwell's Bookshop. They've got this thing they call subscriber only lectures. The idea is you pay them some money each month, and you can go into they've got like a library of lectures that are only available to subscribers, and I've done 3 so far.
Very cool. So pre-recorded, not like Zoom.
Yeah, well, they are. They're pre-recorded audio with slides on top of me just talking about. So I've done 3 dealing with the history of Tantra. It's a 3-part series. I've done 1 on the Cannibal Club, which was this weird 19th century drinking club of anthropologists who wrote pornography. Very strange people. And I'm going to do one on the origins of the left-hand path.
Very cool.
That's going to be my next project. Aside from that, well, I'm working on another book with Mike, which I'm not sure we're about halfway through typesetting at the moment. Hopefully we'll be able to get that out maybe towards the middle of next year, if we're lucky. That's going to be a collection of Kali tantras. Tantras related to the goddess Kali, subject quite dear to me. Aside from that, I don't know.
And just frequent posting on infolding.org.
Well, not as frequent. I think I would like to do more posting, actually. But
yeah, it's lovely. It's a good resource.
I used to be, when I was working for a major publisher, I managed to manage 4 a month, and now I'm down to like 1 or 2 if I'm lucky. So right. I think I'd like to do more posting on Infolding, because there's loads of things that I started and thought, oh yeah, I'll get back to this in a few months' time, and actually it turns out to be 5 years since I did the last post. And I keep looking at this stuff. I really must get back to talking about that court case, because I never actually finished what I wanted to say about that.
Yeah, there was a great series you did about yogis and gurus.
That was again just an occasional thing. Yeah,
right. Yeah, just I know it was sequential, so there was parts to it, but I didn't realize. Yeah, it was probably stuttered. When you got back to it.
I love that about that kind of writing. Blogging really fits for me, because I have an idea and I write it down, and I'll either it'll stay with me and I'll get a whole bunch of posts out really quickly, or my interests will wander.
Right.
This is my big problem. My interest wanders all over
the
place.
Yeah.
Sometimes it takes years to get back. But I am thinking of doing a book called Yogis Behaving Badly.
I love it.
And this will be a lot of my work that I've done on, say, like yoga and magic in the 19th century. events in Indian history where we've got yogis really behaving in quite out of order ways that we don't expect, like armed yogis taking over a state in the early 19th century.
I see a lot of subscription to problematic guru behavior.
The way I think of it is like this. There are teachers who abuse their students in various ways, but does it invalidate the entire teaching profession? Should we, because there's one or two teachers out there who abuse their positions, should we therefore get rid of all teachers?
Right, it's not an absolute now. Yeah.
It's the same thing with gurus,
There are good gurus.
There are dodgy gurus, but there are good ones.
Yeah.
What one of my Indian friends said to me is, well, the good ones tend not to advertise.
Right. Yeah.
And there is precedent for this in the learned text. There's a yogic text called the Dattatreya Yoga Shastra, and it's got this argument about magical powers, because I did this whole lot of research on yoga and magical powers, which seems to have got slipped by people's attention, I think, to some degree. But in the Dattatreya Yoga Shastra, it's got this whole passage about, it's got a rationale for why you shouldn't display your yogic supernatural powers in public. And it's not because it's it'll get you caught up in ego or samsara, or it'll stop you being spiritual and enlightened. It's nothing to do with that. It's basically said, look, if you've got magical powers, just show them off to people in private. Don't show them to a big bunch of people, because they'll all flock around you. They'll all become your students. You'll spend so much time dealing with all their shit, you won't have enough time for your own practice.
Yeah.
So don't do it in public.
Be intentional and personal with it. Yeah.
Just show them off to people who won't make a big fuss about it.
Yeah.
If you make a big fuss about having magical powers, you'll just attract loads of idiots who'll take up all your time, and you won't have any time for your own practice. So actually, that's really sensible.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. It really does. It's funny too with the advent, like we were talking about earlier. The culture, quote unquote, with the internet and these websites. I don't want to name names.
It's kind of like people who write blurbs on the back of occult books and say, oh, so and so is a member of the Grand Order of Lunatics.
Right.
It always just seems to be a bit camp.
Yeah. Why say that?
Phil Hine is an initiated wazoo of the Grand Order of Fuckwits. Who cares?
Yeah.
Okay, I know you have to do that sort of thing. I got into a bit of that with Falcon, because they wanted to put some blurb on the back of the book, and I'm going, no, I'm not having that. I think they wanted to say something like, oh, Phil Hine, chaos magicians. Well, look, the whole point about writing the book was to say I'm not a chaos magician.
Not just a chaos magician. Yeah.
Not just a chaos magician. Oh, that was just a phase I went through, actually, so please don't describe me as a chaos magician. And they were kind of like, okay, fine, no problem. Some people are really good at that self-promotion stuff, and I'm not really.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some people out there who are really adept at it, and I'm just like, can't be asked. I think I maybe should be more adept at it, and that way I'd probably have some more money than I have now at the moment. But
yeah, how is just to kind of wrap up this wonderful conversation, I just want to ask, like, what's your relationship with your lineage now of your work?
Sorry,
your relationship with the lineage of your work, and because you're obviously like,
what do you mean the lineage of my work?
So like Tantra is, I think it'd be safe to say, is your like major focus.
It's my major focus at the moment. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and so like your relationship to being pigeonholed, I think, as a
chaos
magician.
Well, yeah, it kind of annoys me sometimes, right. But then I think, well, maybe the best way to counter that is to actually get some material out there that isn't chaos magic. So I think that's something I need to work on.
Seems like you've been doing it.
Yeah, but I obviously need to do more of it.
Right.
So just so people say, oh, okay. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I should write a book on Wicca.
Yeah.
That'd be cool, wouldn't it?
It would.
Traditional Northern English Wicca. Maybe not, actually. I don't think I'm even that unusual. I think most of the people I know, probably of my generation, have gone through multiple trajectories.
Right.
And I think that's normal. I mean, you mentioned something in your original question list about belief shifting. I
Yes.
think. And
Yes.
I always think of this guy we knew when I was in York studying occupational therapy, and he tried this belief shifting exercise, and he became born again Christian, and he's still a born again Christian as far as I know.
Okay.
But he's a lot happier, you know.
Yeah.
You know, he doesn't take drugs anymore. He doesn't drink anymore. His problems with women have disappeared because I don't think it has anything to do with women. Full stop. He just seems a lot happier being a born again Christian. You know.
Is there a want for you with your work in Tantra, especially like writing about it? Is there a want for it to become a bit more recognized or practiced, or is there any
Um,
intent like that?
I don't know that there is, because I
Yeah.
mean, there's, you know, now that we're seeing a much more now that there's more good translations appearing and some really good um, academic work being produced, which is actually really accessible to a non-specialist audience. I don't know. I mean, it's something I think for the past 15 years, I've toyed with the idea of doing a book on Tantra, and I thought, nah, maybe not. So it's still a kind of maybe, maybe not thing. I don't know. I
Yeah.
might not.
Well, it seems like Tantra
But I
became a
don't
big
feel
belief shift for you, right?
it is. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I want to write a book about it.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, this was actually a problem I started to find that um, in the early 90s when I was living in London, in somewhat not dissimilar circumstances that I find myself now, in that I didn't have a steady income. I was doing loads and loads of magical workshops. I mean, a lot, you know, one-offs, week-long things. I was, you know, doing workshops on sigils, on servitors, on performance magic, this, that, and the other, anything I could do. And I suddenly realized that I was trying out magical techniques, not because I was interested in for my own, if you like, development, but because I thought they'd make good workshops. That was a real kind of like kick in the teeth. I thought, oh shit, you know, I'm just turning into a fucking workshop person. And I got and that kind of stopped me doing workshops. And I haven't really done any workshops since. I think the last one I did was in, I think, 99 or something like that. And now I find I'm actually going to other people's workshops to relearn how to do workshops. It's fine to do a workshop because you've practiced something for a long time, but I mean, to take up a technique and try it, it's just like I just became one of those people who go on a 6-month course or 3-month course and then become a teacher themselves.
Wrote a book about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll write a book about it. That's terrible. You know, I didn't want to be that sort of person.
Yeah.
I think I would like to do more. I would like to dip my hand now that I'm getting to grips with the podcasty world. I think I would like to do some online workshops. That I'll probably have to actually go to some to see how it's done.
Yeah, do you think it seems kind of like in Congress with, chaos magic, is that people, even I know for me, like learning music or whatever was, I just wanted to write music. So I learned as I went. Like, I'm not going to publish a book about, magic or
Yeah.
songwriting. I'm not going to publish a book about songwriting. Not because I don't think that, I write songs or whatever. It's just that I don't think I'm an authority on it. Do you think there's like too many people thinking they're authorities on this?
I don't know, really, because
Yeah. Oh, that's right. You don't. Yeah, you don't read any occult stuff.
no, I think it's very easy to trick yourself into believing that you're an authority. I mean,
Right.
I don't think of myself as an authority on Tantra. Or in fact, I don't think of myself as an authority on magic. I'm just somebody who's, maybe got a big mouth uh, and done some stuff and wanted to share it with people.
Right.
That's how I think of it. It's a very interesting question, actually, is what makes a text authoritative,
Right. Yeah.
Why do we take that text seriously and why do we not take that text seriously? That's a really hard question, actually, I think.
The collective conscious of, practicing a work that makes it higher than another and that I don't know if that's necessarily true.
I don't think it's true at all.
Yeah.
I think there's various. There's various. I think it's a very complex question that I wouldn't want to speculate about really. But I mean, why is it that I don't know? Text A is preferred to text B.
Yeah.
Is it a historical thing? What people often say to me when they read my work is that they feel it resonates with them.
Yeah.
I often get is people say, "Oh, I could have written that." And then, okay, then.
That's
But
actually a great compliment.
It is, but and I find that that's what resonates. It feels natural, because people who like my work might not like it for the same reasons, or it doesn't gel with it. I think this is a real interesting thing about magic that for me, which I think I tried to touch on when I was talking about fiction, is that there has to be an emotional connection, and that is that emotional connection, whether it be with a piece of fiction or a film or a song or a supposedly magical textbook. There has to be an emotional resonance.
Yeah.
And that I think is really important, and I think we don't often acknowledge that. So people who want their magic to be very dry and kind of like almost like a technical manual can read Pete Carroll. If they want it all kind of like medieval woo they can, I don't know, read Agrippa or somebody. See, I've no idea who Agrippa is, or I've got a vague idea, obviously, but I've never actually read it. So
yeah,
and different styles of writing, different approach to different people.
Yeah,
I think is the important thing. Once people start going on about energies and aggregates, I just lose interest. Really,
I caught you off guard with that earlier.
I think the explanation should be, let's get the prosaic explanation sorted out before we go off into real woo.
Yeah, let's get real.
But again, that's just me.
Yeah, absolutely, and that that's something I've always really appreciated about your work is, the kind of, I hate to use the phrase down to earth, but there is something very earthly about it. And I get why people, a compliment to you was, hey, I could have written this, because I read some of your work, I giggle to myself, or it's just like, that's the reaction
I'm hoping for.
Yeah.
That is, I when I do lectures, I'll often fix my gaze on one person in the audience and try my best to make them laugh.
I love it. Yeah, that seems like a great public speaking technique.
You see somebody frowning, I just think, okay, I'm going to make you laugh before the end of it. If it kills me,
The lasting impression I have from all your work, obviously, there's axioms of don't look for mentors like teachers, look for friends, or there's, quotes like, don't take it too seriously. Like, these things last within me about my own practice.
Well, the reason I'm writing that is because, of course, I spent a very long time taking it very seriously.
Right, you had to figure it out.
I was that person who bored other people stupid at parties by just, don't talk to him. He's just into the occult and he talks bollocks. I was that person.
Yeah,
droning away. Why is it you don't have any friends? Why is it you have problems picking up people? Because you just talk about the occult all the time. Oh yeah. So yeah, I was that boring guy. I was that obsessed person. I did think I was a magus. And those are just things that you have to work through.
Phil, thank you so much for giving me your time. It has been an absolute pleasure.
It's been my pleasure too. I love.
This is so much fun. Thank you for starting my morning laughing.
Oh, my pleasure too. And have a good day. Bye now. I want to give another sincere thanks to Mr. Phil Hine for chatting with me. It was amazing for me, and I really hope we do it again. Please purchase Hine's Varieties and read enfolding.org. I'll have all those links in the show notes. And I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you, and I'm terrible about this, to subscribe to PRAGMAGICK on YouTube or wherever pods are casted. Like, share, review. Any engagement helps. Leave a comment. Hopefully I saw you in the live chat. And if you missed it and you only like listening, then the podcast will be available tonight wherever pods are casted. And wethehallowed.org, where the article will be up with both this and the audio. Thank you all so much. Again, I hope you had a hairy horror day. And it's something we always say in We the Hallowed, and that is to live on through art and ideas. So, my friends, haunt on. Love never knows.